This is a musical instrument because it makes a sound, makes a pitch. But instruments sound different. Real musical instruments sound different from one another. So we want to explore why. And to help us do that, we have musician and mathematician from Rollins College in Florida, Whitney Coyle. Please welcome Whitney Coyle.
Thank you guys for having me. This is a really nice transition to go from talking about these boom whackers, which they showed you. They were musical, right? We got to hear a song. And the great thing they just showed us was that the length of our boom whacker determined the pitch, right? They showed us that the low one was the long one, okay? And the high one was the short one, the one that you have, right? And it's pretty cool because musical instruments, a very basic thing we can see is that they do pretty much the same thing. One that you might be familiar with, are there any trombone players in the audience? We like the trombone, right? It's pretty fun. Let's see what he can do for us. Perfect, right? So what did he do? He lengthened the slide. He made the instrument actually longer, so it played a lower pitch, right? He brought the slide back in, and he was able to bring the pitch up. So it's pretty easy to see on the trombone what's happening there. Maybe a little harder to see on these two instruments, two of my favorites. I play the clarinet, so I'm a little biased, but the clarinet and the flute. So if you're not familiar, let me give you a little demonstration of what these guys sound like. So the flute sounds like this. Okay, and how can we perhaps change the pitch of a flute? Well, one way is to lift up some fingers. So when I do that, what I'm actually doing is shortening the length of the instrument. The sound is going to partly come out of this first open hole now. Now that my fingers are off, the pitch should be higher. Let's see. And it is, so that's good, right? And the same thing for the clarinet. So I put all of my fingers down. I lift some fingers up. All of them. That also works. So that's interesting. I mean, I'm changing the length of the instrument. It changes the notes, among other things that we can do. We'll learn later. But for these two instruments, they're about the same length, okay? So they should, with all of my fingers down, play about the same note, but they don't. And they don't sound the same, do they? So today we're going to figure out why that might be, okay? So Alan, could you tell me, maybe, what do you see about these two instruments that are different?
Well, obviously, one is shiny and one is dark, so the shiny one is higher.
That might be the case. That's a really good hypothesis, which we're going to test.
Wouldn't you think?
That might be why. So they used to make clarinets out of metal, too. So there were some shiny clarinets. There were also wood flutes. I'm sure you've heard them. And they still sound really fluty. So let's try a different theory. Is there anything else that you see that's different here?
Well, one has that wood on the end.
That's right. So the reed, the clarinet reed, is very different than how I play the flute. So with the clarinet, I have to put the whole mouthpiece in my mouth, and you're blowing over top of this little piece of wood at the beginning, okay? And as you blow across the top, the reed begins to vibrate, but really, really small vibrations, okay? And it sends these vibrations into the instrument. Whereas for the flute, when I play, I'm actually playing it kind of like a soda bottle, okay? I'm blowing across this hole here, okay? And as the air hits the edge of this hole, it starts to vibrate, okay? So instead of with the reed, it's really just hitting the hole, vibrating back and forth, and that's how the sound can begin, okay? Well, the big difference about these instruments that we're going to see today is, as I said, the beginning. And what we as acousticians call this is this opening here. It's an open end. So where the sound begins is actually at the opening here. And the other end is open, of course. We want to be able to hear musical sound, right? But for the clarinet, because the reed is on the mouthpiece inside your mouth, we actually consider this to be a closed end of the instrument, okay? The sound can only exit through the end, okay? It can't come back out here, right? But for the flute, you could have it exit at each end. I'm not sure if you've ever seen flautists use a microphone. They actually are up really close to the microphone because the sound can come out here or the other end. But what's happening inside is probably the most interesting thing. So the beginnings of the instruments change that. So we want to understand what's happening inside to figure out what we're going to hear, okay? So the way we're going to do that, we don't usually get to see sound, unfortunately, but we have an apparatus that we're going to use today that's going to help us see sound. And the way we're going to do that is by using this tube. Okay, it's a much larger tube than a musical instrument, but in some similar ways, it has little bitty holes drilled on the top, okay? And there's a speaker at this end. So instead of a reed, instead of me blowing into the instrument, there's a speaker. And what sound really is, okay, is this speaker, you may have seen before, is going to push on the gas that's inside of the tube. Usually a speaker is pushing on air. And that push on the air, that compression of the air comes to your ear vibrates, as you just learned from Eddie, right? But for the Ruben's tube, so that we can see sound, I'm not going to put air in here. What could we maybe put inside this tube? Water, that would be interesting. Yeah, I've seen that before. We're going to put some type of gas. How about propane? Okay, so we're going to put propane into this tube. Okay.
Oh, well, look, here comes the fire department.
Yeah, we got some safety here. I was told to say, kids, don't try this ever. Let's just go with that. Okay, so I'm going to plug some things up and see what we can get. For now, there's no sound in the tube, but I got to get the fire started, right? This is the flame challenge, so we may as well have some flames at some point. So, give it a second to warm up here. And what you're going to see is that there's some tubes back here. You can't see this part. But all of these little holes have little bits of the propane coming out, okay? And so, like I said, for now, no sound, nothing super interesting, but we are going to see a little bit of fire, we hope, and not need the fire extinguisher. Let's see. Okay, good. We've got the fire. So for now, if you're seeing them moving, it's from the air conditioning, okay? Moving back and forth, nothing we can do about that, unfortunately. But before we talk about this in a perhaps musical acoustics type of way, we are going to turn this down a bit. It's one thing. Don't want to create any bad things here. We are going to maybe just see what happens if I put some classical music into here, okay? So I'm going to change this over. I'm going to play a piece by perhaps the most famous rock star ever, okay? His name is Bach. Maybe you know him. And see what happens to the flames in our tube. So we're going to actually see sound, okay? You ready? See what happens. Make sure it's all good and turned up. And I'm going to step away just a little bit. See what we get.
So let me make sure I get this.
Yes.
The sound, the loudspeaker is at the end of the tube, and every time the volume changes, the propane gets compressed.
Right.
And where it gets compressed and moves in a wave, that's where you have more of it burning, so the flame shoots higher.
Right, so in this case, what you were seeing is as it was jumping, it's reacting to how fast or how hard, I guess, the speaker is pressing on that propane. So for now, with this music, you know that music like this has a lot of different frequencies. He's not just, playing one piano key. That might get a little boring after a while. But he's playing a lot of different piano keys, right? So the different frequencies will make this flame do different things. So one interesting thing we could do is let's just send one frequency into our Ruben's tube. Try not to get too close. All right. And we can see if we can see one wave, right? We saw a lot of different things jumping. Let's see, turn it down a little bit. Not that high. So what I'm doing is I'm sending one frequency in now. And for certain frequencies, the tube really likes it. And what you're going to see, if I can find one for you guys, turn it down a little bit. It's a little finicky with the air conditioning, so. Not finding one. So what we're trying to see is at certain frequencies, you're actually going to get places where you have a distinct area of high pressure, so it's really squished together, and that flame should be higher, and it should stay there. And then you have areas of low pressure, okay? So as we go along, if I continue increasing the frequency, we'll find many more of those pictures. So that's what's called, for this tube, this length of tube, it's called a resonance frequency. So I kind of like to think about it like the frequencies that this tube likes, okay? I don't change the length, and I'm able to figure out when the sound, if you're listening, is actually really loud. It's a frequency the tube likes. Okay? And you'll end up getting those different peaks. Sorry, I couldn't find them for you here. I'll try one more time. It's very slight, the difference. You know, that's what you get. You rehearse, and what do you get? Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and turn this down and tell you how that can relate to our musical instruments. I mean, flames are great, right? But we still are going to talk about this clarinet over here, so let's be safe about this. I'm going to turn my propane off. All right. Plenty of wonderful videos out there where you can watch this and see some more. Okay, so how can we relate that to musical instruments? What I was trying to show you, and at least I can tell you about, is the fact that for this one note that I would play for you on a flute, there are actually many notes being played at the same time. Musical sound is so interesting because your ear is actually hearing more than just that one note, okay? So if I played you the flute, and I played just this one note, we say, well, yes, that sounds like a flute. We know that sounds like a flute, but why? We are definitely getting there. So I'm gonna ask our trombone player to come back out for us. Okay, and just like the Ruben's tube, he's not gonna change the length. Okay, he's going to change something else. And so play your favorite note for me, please. It's a good one. It's a good note, yeah. And without changing the slide, can you find other notes for us, perhaps? Great,
How did he
excellent.
Do that? Come on.
Bravo. So what is it musically that he's doing as a musician? He's changing a little bit about how tight his embouchure is. He's blowing a little bit harder. And I can actually do the same thing for the flute. So I'm going to play that low note again, okay? And then I'm going to blow a little bit harder and see if I can find those other frequencies that this tube likes, okay? So I'm not going to change my fingers. And if you've been watching up here, this is kind of fun to watch, right? You can just turn this on at a party or something and have a little fun. So what we're seeing here is it's kind of like a frequency finder. So this program is picking up what frequencies are being heard in the room. So if I play the flute one more time, just to see this lowest frequency that I'm actually playing, okay?
All those spikes are other tones that are being played at the same time?
At the same time. So your ear is great. It says, well, I know that the highest one.
We think we're only hearing the first one on the left.
That's right. That's exactly right. So your ear says, okay, I understand that this frequency that I'm playing is around 500 hertz, if you look at the bottom line here. And the highest one, the strongest one, the one that your ear understands is the note, is that first one, okay? But what makes it sound like a flute, what gives it its tone color or timbre, as you may have heard before, is the fact that you have a lot of other things happening that you don't really perceive as being the note. But it also means that if you follow, as I play here in a moment, if you follow, I'm going to play the low note. As I blow harder, I can actually play on that second highest peak, okay? And these are called harmonics. Try again. So as I blow harder and harder, I'm actually going up onto those different harmonics. And okay, that sounds like a flute, great. But we still haven't talked about why a clarinet doesn't sound like a flute, right? The clarinet, it turns out, does not have all of those peaks like the flute does. Okay, so all of these peaks, we actually saw that, couldn't do the calculation that fast, but you saw that the first frequency, let's say, was around 200 hertz or so. The second frequency that I played was about 400, so it was twice that. The next one was 3 times the first one, so 2, 400, 600, so on and so on. So I have all of the harmonics in this sound. Okay? The clarinet actually doesn't have every other one of those. So you can't play, like I did for the flute, you can't play the second harmonic. There's a big jump. So for example, if I were to play, just really quickly, the clarinet, I'm going to keep all my fingers down. I'm going to do something a little tricky to try to play the next harmonic, like I did on the flute, okay? So I actually skipped one of them, and I really can't do anything with keeping all of my fingers the same way.
What if you got a better clarinet? What is there
really
about
good
the clarinet
question.
that makes you not able to play those in between harmonics?
It's a really good question. So that goes back to when we were talking about that this end is effectively closed, and this end is open, whereas this is open and open. So you're not able, acoustically, you're not able to get the ones in between. And it's an interesting thing because if you wanted to have a perception of the sound, if you listen to a clarinet versus a flute, what are some words you might think of to describe the sound? Anything you can think of? High and low, that's good, yeah. How about the timbre, the tone color of the sound? Yes. Shrill and fat, I like that. Yes, okay. So the words I always think of, I really do, I'm going to write those down. The words I always think of are like a dark or, let's stick with dark, fat, and a bright sound. So a lot of people say the clarinet has a darker sound, and what contributes to that is physically not being able to play those even number 2, 4, and 6, and 8, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to ask a little assistant here to help me play, just so we can see. So like I said, on the flute, I can play 1, 2, and 3. So I'm just going to do that really quickly, and you guys can follow along on our cool graph up here. Okay, 1, 2, and 3. And what can you do? Okay, so like I said, she was skipping one of them, but it may be hard to hear. So let's try to play together. Forgive us if we're not in tune, okay? That's scientist, right? Okay. Okay, here we go. So I was able to play the second one, but she's not. And so that's one of the many things that the most important to me that makes the clarinet sound so much different than the flute. Thank you so much. Wonderful clarinet player. Last minute. Thank you. So to finish up here, to kind of give you something to test our hypothesis, okay? We said at first, well, maybe it's because of the body of the instrument, right? This one's metal, this one's wood. Maybe that affects something. Or what if I were to put a clarinet beginning on a flute end? Okay, we're going to test some hypotheses, see if I can actually play this crazy instrument. What should happen based on what we've learned today? Should it sound like a clarinet or a flute? A clarinet, exactly. So we've got that closed end, open end. Let's see how I do here. That's pretty clarinet-y, right? Yeah, okay. So I think that as a, I'm not going to call this like, okay, a flute with a clarinet head, right? We made a new instrument. So we have two choices here. I thought of this. We can either call it a clarinet or a klute, but I'll let you guys decide, speak amongst yourselves, and we'll reconvene afterwards, okay?
Thank you. Great, Whitney. Thank you so much. That
Thank
was
you.
great. Whitney Coyle.